Hey everyone, Kathy the Vegan Prepper here, bringing you a video discussing the pros and cons of 3 different grains that you might be considering putting up for your long-term storage. And so I'd like to discuss them especially from a uniquely vegan perspective, but also sort of in general. I think this would apply to everyone across the board. But we're really just going to dive into some pros and cons. And again, sometimes it's going to depend on where you are in your prepping journey. So let's just go ahead and get right into it. Also, forgive me, I am going to be referencing a lot of notes for this. I've taken a ton of notes and done some research, and there's too much for me to just try to remember. So when you see my eyes go down, I'm looking at my notes, okay? All right, so let's get right into it. We're going to be discussing white rice, brown rice, and quinoa, and some of, again, the pros and cons, starting with price. So currently, pricing for organic quinoa on Azure Standard, you can get a 25-pound bag for $58.95. That works out to be about $2.36 a pound. At Costco, you can pay $10.99 for 4.5 pounds, which ends up working out to $2.44 a pound. But the quinoa that you get from Costco is pre-rinsed. So that's like a major plus. In fact, all of the quinoa I currently have in my store has come from Costco, but I do have a 25-pound bag of quinoa in my Azure Standard cart for my next order that I'm going to be picking up, because I am ramping up the storage of my quinoa, and we're going to start getting into why I am doing that. The pricing for brown rice on Azure Standard, the average / cheapest I could find was $2.50 a pound for organic and $1.50 a pound for non-organic. At Costco, they sell only one kind that I have found. It's a short grain brown rice, which isn't always the best for replacing white rice in a dish, but boy, does this make a really good sushi type meal rolled up in nori with some veggies and some tempeh and all of that. So that's kind of one of the main ways that we use this. I also make a really delicious oil-free mushroom risotto with the short grain brown rice. But anyway, I get it. About 12 pounds for like $11.99 or $10.99, kind of depending on the day. So it works out to be about $1 a pound for organic brown rice at Costco. For white rice, again, I'm just comparing Costco and Azure Standard because those are the two places that I mainly shop. It's $9.19 for white rice at Costco, non-organic, 25 pounds, $9.19. It works out to about 37 cents a pound. Azure Standard, the lowest that they have is $1.20 a pound for non-organic white rice. So the winner here, it kind of depends on your access. Again, do you have a Costco membership? Are you affiliated with, or do you have an Azure Standard account? Are you able to be flexible and go pick up your order from Azure Standard? Or are you buying like just from Walmart or whatever local store that you have on hand? So you might need to be checking your own pricing. And so again, winner is really going to kind of depend on your access and what you have available to you. But still, most likely, the winner is going to be white rice. That's probably going to be your cheapest. So if you are, this is where I'm saying, like, it kind of depends on where you are in your prepping journey. So if you are absolutely just at the very, very beginning and you haven't really started prepping or putting up food at all yet, and then especially if you are on a budget and you need the most calorie bang for your buck, then I would say go ahead and start with white rice. Get yourself a 25-pound bag of white rice, 25-pound bag of dry beans, and just do that over and over again until you get yourself to probably at least a 2-week supply. That's really what Mr. Vegan Prepper and I did. That's how we started, a while ago. And then kind of once we got ourselves to that place, we were able to start kind of diversifying. And then you can stock spices in order to spice it up and make it different. White rice and beans can be turned into cuisine from so many countries just based on the spice blends. And that's reminding me that's another video that I need to go ahead and make. I need to make the video that talks about how you can stock your spices and then make cuisine from those spices from different countries. It's like they all use the same spices. It's just like there's usually like the one accent or like the one that gets left out or whatever. Anyway, so knowing that, you can create some real versatility in your stock, even if your stock in and of itself seems plain, you really can spice it up. But like I said, if you're just beginning, stick with white rice. And especially if you have a major budget, maybe you're not beginning, but you still are like on a really tight budget and you need to make sure that you're making every dollar count, then go ahead and just do the white rice. It's better to have some food than no food. It's better to have a few months of food than only a few weeks of food, if it ends up being a real consideration of yours. But for me personally, because we do have quite a stock, I am now focusing more on a nutrition enrichment. So I'm getting the most nutrition bang for my buck. And that is where I am starting to focus a lot more on quinoa. We will be getting into nutrition in a little bit. So let's just kind of continue along the way. So another factor to look into, especially if you're looking at putting up long-term storage, is the shelf life. So one of the things that I was really surprised to learn is that white rice, well, I wasn't surprised about this particular part, but white rice has a shelf life usually of at least 30 years. So as always, kind of the mechanics of shelf life usually boils down to how much fat the food has. So for instance, all-purpose ground white flour can last you for anywhere from 20 to 30 years as long as it's stored in, Mylar bags, oxygen absorbers, and kept safe from bugs and rodents and all of that stuff. You can get a really long shelf life out of that food. Same thing with a white rice or a white pasta, because when you move into a whole grain like brown rice, this still has the kernel around it, which is definitely really rich in nutrients. However, it also contains some fat, which makes it go rancid much faster than something that has that removed. So that's where, even though technically this is not as nutritious as this, you will get a longer shelf life out of the white rice than you will out of the brown rice. And so it's just sort of a consideration to make. So for instance, white rice can be anywhere from 20 to 30 years or more, depending on how it is stored. Brown rice, probably the most you're going to get out of it is like 3 to 5 years. So that's a real bummer if you want to store super nutritious whole grain food. However, the big shocker to me was finding out that quinoa has a shelf life of, again, about 20 years. You can get 20 years of shelf life out of quinoa for same thing again in like a Mylar bag, oxygen absorber. And so that is what kind of really originally, even though I know that quinoa is nutritious and good, that was the thing that originally kind of like turned my head towards quinoa for any kind of long-term food storage. So this is an excellent option. So technically in shelf life, the winner is technically white rice. It's gonna technically last the longest. But if you want to look at, again, kind of the most nutrition bang for your buck, and like taking it all together, I don't know, 20 years is still pretty good. But technically, white rice wins in both price and shelf life so far. Now let's go ahead and talk about some versatility. So all of these things can be ground into flours. So if you've got yourself a grain mill or like a Vitamix or even a mortar and pestle, you can go like full Stone Age and just do it by hand. It's annoying, but it can be done. So all of it can be ground into flours. And quinoa, though, I'm going to talk a little bit about all the different things that you can do with quinoa. Quinoa makes an excellent mock meat. You can prepare it with spices and cook it in such a way that it takes on a lot of like the texture and flavor of ground meat. Quinoa can also be popped. It can be cooked dry in a skillet. It becomes like a crunch, which you can add then to your granola or use as a topping on other things. Way back in the day, I used to make these little chocolates for my sons that like for their Easter or whatever, because I have one son with a peanut allergy and another son who shouldn't have dairy, and like we have like all these little things going on, and veganism just fits so beautifully on all of that. But which is another thing, just really fast, if somebody's watching this that's not vegan isn't always an ethical thing, although of course for us we definitely do love the animals and we're vegan largely because of the animals. But veganism also covers anybody who has dairy or egg allergies, because you know for sure that if you're looking at a vegan thing, it's not going to have those things in it. So that's kind of like another reason in case anybody's like threatened by the whole vegan thing, that there's other reasons too that people end up kind of segueing into veganism. But anyway, but yeah, as always, no judgment from me. I was not born vegan. I have no judgment to anybody who's not eating vegan. That I don't should on people. I never have. I never will. I hate it when people should on me, and I just will never do that. So just so you understand. Anyway, sorry. So quinoa, I used to make these little Easter, like they're Easter bunnies. I actually got like a bunny mold, and I would make them these little like almond butter or sunflower seed butter and cacao butter and cacao powder and like coconut oil chocolates. But I would toast quinoa, because one of the things they both really missed was like that Nestle Crunch bar. And you toast the quinoa and mix it in there, and then when you eat it, it's like a little crunch, like a Nestle Crunch bar type thing. So that's just like, that was free, just as an idea. That's another thing that you can do with quinoa that makes it really great. Quinoa has a great texture in meatloafs and meatballs and patties. I like to fill out a lot of my vegan patties and things like that with a little bit of quinoa. It just gives it a good texture. Quinoa and brown rice are also suitable for sprouting, but white rice is not going to sprout. Sprouted quinoa can also be fermented and turned into Rejuvelac, which is a probiotic beverage. Some people drink it as a probiotic drink, but it also can be used as a culture for fermenting vegan cheeses and yogurts. And even I think over at Gourmet Vegetarian Kitchen, it's one of my favorite YouTube channels in the world. She, I believe, also uses Rejuvelac to start tofu. So something to keep in mind, like this, it's a majorly versatile thing that you have in a quinoa. Rice, though, I will say, like, so those are all kind of like special extra things, but when it comes down to just versatility across cultures, rice is the most familiar. It's the most familiar texture in multiple cuisines. White rice the world over, right? We've got like in Mexican cuisine, you've got basmati rice in Indian cuisine, even, you know, sushi rice in Japanese cuisine, or just like regular white rice in other Asian cuisines. And you've got so many different cuisines that base themselves on just like a good old-fashioned plain white rice. So it ends up also being versatile in a way that the other ones are not, because it just will create those really familiar dishes. Although I will say for ourselves, while I do really love my white rice for that texture in those dishes, a lot of those they're just fine with quinoa instead. But the other kind of nice thing is that because white rice and quinoa have a similar cooking time, which I'm about to talk about, but I'm gonna like interrupt myself and say it early. You can kind of mix quinoa and white rice together and then cook them at the same time, so that you can get a little bit more of the nutrition of the quinoa, but then also get that kind of familiar texture of that white rice, especially if you're transitioning and you have a person who's a really picky eater and hates anything but white rice or white pasta or whatever. You can kind of like start to mix it, and then it can make the transition like a little better. Although I don't think there's anything wrong with eating white rice. It's just if you're wanting to really maximize the nutrition of every bite, or eat a technically very whole foods, you know, super amazing clean whole grain diet or whatever, then technically you would be switching over to something like quinoa or brown rice. But I'm kind of with Plentiful Kiki on this. We like our white rice. I think that overall, I mean, you look at some of the healthiest cultures on earth. Again, I've mentioned Indian cuisine, Japanese cuisine, some of the healthiest cultures on earth, they eat white rice. The white rice is not the problem, okay? Things like white rice, I think, end up becoming the scapegoat for a diet that is completely overrun by saturated fats. And whether you believe they're unhealthy or not, you can't believe that eating them to the excess that Americans consume them is healthy, if that makes sense. Like okay, throw a little coconut oil here and there, that is probably not going to kill you, but anyway, sorry, it's the excess. But like, they eat so many vegetables and so many good fermented foods and seaweed and things like that, and the Indian foods, the spices, are you kidding me? And so yeah, you have a lot of other stuff that's really healthy, like on top of white rice. I don't think it's that big of a deal. So anyway, I'm going to move on from that. So now we're going to get into the cooking times and water usage. I'm combining the two because they actually kind of go together depending upon what cooking technique you're going to use for your grains. So let's get into to soak or not to soak. There's actually a lot of research now that has been done on phytic acid. It's another one of those things I think has been demonized in a lot of the communities out there. Like, phytic acid is so horrible and it's going to prevent you from, you know, assimilating nutrients and all of that stuff, when actually, like, a lot of new research has been done and shown the body kind of begins to process it better. Also, it is entirely possible that phytic acid itself has a protective effect on the body, depending on, you know, for something I can't remember. I should have refreshed that before I did, but I'll put it right here. And it is possible. So your body adapts to it, kind of like with calcium, for instance, or things like that, where your body adapts to how much you get, becomes more efficient at using it if you get less. Like, our bodies are amazing. And I think people the world over, again, for thousands of years, have eaten grains, and not every single one of them had the time and the energy to sit and soak them before they ate them. Is that fair? Is that fair? Anyway, so I don't think it is as essential as a lot of people say. However, there is no denying that taking it from soaking and to sprouting unlocks nutrients, like crazy amounts of nutrients that were not there before. So again, we're kind of balanced on both ends here. Just kind of like, what do you have time for, and what do you have energy for, and what do you have water usage for? So let's get into this. Soaking grains does definitely reduce their cooking time dramatically, but it also uses a lot more water. So if you sprout quinoa and brown rice, if you go even further and sprout them, cooking time is again reduced, but again, water usage is once again increased, especially because the sprouting procedure requires rinsing in order for it to be safe. And you don't let it get moldy. You have to rinse it 2 or 3 times a day until you see the little sprouts, and then you can go ahead and cook them. So basically, any prep that you do in order to reduce your cooking time is also going to increase your water usage. This is something to keep in mind, kind of like depending on what scenario you feel like you're going to be heading into. But also keeping in mind that soaking water and even rinsing water can be saved and used maybe to water plants, or filtered to drink again, or used in some application like dishes or laundry or bathing or something. Like, if you're thinking of some kind of disaster scenario when you really need to conserve your water, you can conserve the water that you use to soak and rinse and sprout your grains. It's just something that we don't always think about, because I think too many times we're used to just being able to turn on the faucet and get more. But like for me, when I soak and rinse and sprout my grains, I try to rinse everything into a tub and then go give that water to my trees. But water usage is something that's very much on my mind anyway, because I live in a desert, and it is something that is a huge concern to me. I wish everybody had a concern about water usage in the desert, but we're not going to get into that. So anyway, thinking about scenarios that you may be heading into, also depending on where you live. Like, do you have a property with just a creek right there, or you just don't ever worry about having enough water because you have a big rain catching system? I don't know. So for instance, generally speaking, a situation in which water would be abundant but fuel would not be abundant, you would obviously be benefited by soaking and or sprouting your grains so that your fuel usage would be less in that situation. And then a situation in which fuel would be abundant, like you have tons of trees around, you have sticks or whatever, you have a big log pile already outside, it's just not something that you're really that concerned about. Fuel is abundant, but maybe water is not so abundant. That would be benefited by not soaking or sprouting your grains prior to cooking. So that's kind of more, I think, where we are. We would be really looking to conserve that water. And if we're soaking or sprouting, we're absolutely going to be saving and reusing that water in that situation. But if you are concerned about fuel specifically, you can also use something like the All-American Sun Oven or the Wonder Bag, which is a great kind of portable crock pot. which you can use in order to reduce your cooking time. We actually have a Firebox and Wonder Bag cooking test that we've already done on the channel, where you can boil your food, stick it in the Wonder Bag, close it up, and that Wonder Bag will maintain that temperature for 6 to 8 hours, and it works beautifully. We cooked 2 pounds of beans just on the Firebox and then into the Wonder Bag, and it was perfect. So that thing is incredible. It really does work. And then in a situation in which neither fuel nor water is abundant, means you probably are going to have to meet in the middle. Perhaps you can soak your grains, but then cook them directly in the soaking water, which some people would say kind of defeats the purpose because all that phytic acid is in the water or whatever. But again, this is just like a scenario. You just might have to do it, and that might just be what you have to do. Okay, it's better to eat than to not eat, right? So it is situationally dependent for sure. That being said, so let's go ahead and look at the cooking times of the grains. And I'm talking specifically unsoaked grains here. So for quinoa, it is a 1-to-2 ratio. So you're looking at a 1 part quinoa to 2 parts water. And it usually takes about 15 minutes. You bring it to a boil, turn the heat down a little bit, let it sit for 15 minutes. And then I even will pull it off the heat and let it sit an additional 10 minutes to just like finish without having to actually physically beat on the heat. And then you have your quinoa. So if you have quinoa that is not pre-washed, quinoa will end up using more water just in the rinsing, because you're rinsing off saponins, which can give it kind of a soapy taste. So either purchase your quinoa pre-rinsed, like I was talking about from Costco, or plan to use a lot of water in your cooking. Or also you can just like test the unwashed quinoa. Maybe you won't mind the taste of that soapiness. But also, again, in a disaster survival situation, you might just need to eat some soapy quinoa, because it's like, what are you going to do? Not eat? And you still want that really good nutrition. So it's just, you know, the point might be kind of moot there, but I just want to bring that up, that a lot of times quinoa needs to be rinsed first because of that taste it has. Brown rice is again a 1-to-2 ratio. So 1 part brown rice to 2 parts water, but that takes about 55 minutes to cook. So this is one of those where you would be ending up using a lot of fuel in order to cook the brown rice. However, if you have something like the Sun Oven or the Wonder Bag especially, that will drastically cut your fuel usage. And so that's a good thing to keep in mind. White rice tends to be a 1 part grain to 1.5 part water scenario. So you'd use like 1.5 cups to 1 cup of white rice, and it usually takes about 20 minutes to cook, depending on the style of rice. Certain ones might take a little longer or a little less time. It just sort of depends on the kind of rice that you're using. So for the cooking time specifically, the winner would end up being quinoa, because it only takes about 15 minutes. But as far as water usage, the winner is the white rice, because it's only a 1.5 part to 1 part grain. So it's using the least amount of water of the 3. As another note, you can, if you still have power or solar and you have an Instant Pot, that's another reason I personally love my Instant Pot, again, because I'm very concerned about water usage in the desert. It ends up being a 1-to-1 ratio for quinoa, a 1-to-1 ratio for white rice, and a 1-to-1.25 ratio for brown rice. So you actually end up using less water because the whole thing is completely contained. And so if you have the ability to plug that in, that could be a good choice for some water conservation as well. And now, finally, let's discuss nutrition. So I believe hands down the winner of this one, spoilers again, is going to be quinoa. It is, as it sits, already a complete protein. This is where I guess I could point out that quinoa is not technically a grain. It's actually technically a seed, but it's called a pseudo grain because it tends to be processed by the body much like grains are anyway. But there's actually, like, for instance, people who are like paleo, who don't use any grains whatsoever, sometimes will still allow quinoa because of the fact that it is a seed. But anyway, it's a complete protein. There are many vitamins and minerals in here, including tons of iron, potassium, manganese, copper, folate, magnesium, and zinc. This is just a huge, amazing nutrition profile to this, and I think that anybody would be well served by having that in their rotation, whether you're vegan or not, but especially if you're vegan, again, that complete protein all by itself, so that you don't necessarily have to put the beans and the rice together to get the complete protein. That's awesome. Brown rice is better nutritionally than white rice, but still not quite as good on most parts as the quinoa. It's full of B vitamins, protein, iron, magnesium, phosphorus, zinc, copper, manganese, selenium, and more. White rice essentially ends up serving as calories and general carbs, like energy. But if you buy enriched white rice, then you might end up with a lot of nutrients, specifically usually folate and maybe even some iron, depending on how it was enriched. So it is entirely possible that you may end up with some good nutrition, well, some nutrition anyway, in a white rice that's fortified. So that could be kind of like a middle ground. Again, if you're looking at the most calorie bang for your buck, you want white rice. And then if you want to up the nutrition a little bit without having to spend too much more, you can get yourself some enriched white rice. But I don't think enriched foods are always the best, but it's kind of better than nothing. So I think nutritionally across the board, the winner has to be quinoa. It is the most nutritious. And yeah, I think that basically actually covers the whole thing. So I would say, kind of knowing overall that I still will use brown rice often in my cooking, but I'm not going to be stocking up large quantities of it, just especially because of the fact that it has such a short shelf life. We already have quite a lot of white rice put up, and it's kind of in a long-term storage type situation, but we do definitely still use it in our cooking, primarily in the form of basmati rice, because we do a lot of Indian food in this house. And so, yeah, we do have white rice. Ours is not enriched. And we use it, again, kind of as a filler to the meals, and we focus our nutrition elsewhere. But I also do end up using a ton of quinoa, and like I've mentioned before, I like to use it creatively in a lot of ways. And so this will often be just sort of the base of a meal. And then, you know, we'll put our beans or our tempeh or whatever on top with all our veggies and sauerkraut or whatever, seaweed, and kind of like have our big nutrition packed meal. And then quinoa is just like extra nutritious. So again, kind of for me, where I am in my prepping journey, I'm focusing a lot more now on quinoa, just so that I can start having a long-term storage option that is really rich in nutrients. But yeah, if you're just getting started, probably white rice is the way to go. And I know that I have already said all of that, but yeah, anyway, that's it. So I hope that this was helpful to you at all. Sorry I got so long, but we did have quite a lot to discuss. And yeah, just let me know, what do you think? If I missed anything, if you have any ideas or any creative ways that you use any of this stuff, or yeah, like what do you think you're going to be doing now? For your long-term storage. And yeah, hopefully, again, yeah, that was helpful. And yeah, just talk to me down in the comments below. I really love reading all of your comments. And as always, I hope the rest of your day is good and your life stays wonderful. Thank you so much for watching. Bye.